Okay, hey everybody, Aaron Mac, BS Detector. I'm hoping that this is not going to be too loud, too obnoxious. But I was watching my video back on the TV yesterday, and it was like hella quiet. So I'm doing this. All right. I realized that part two was very yappy on my part, so I'm just gonna shut the hell up and just read the damn book. Let's get it over with. All right. We were in the middle of, or kind of towards the beginning of this letter from Benjamin Friedman, the soap maker, to Dr. Goldstein. All right. And we were talking, and he was talking in his letter about the status of Christianity in the U.S. All right. This status of the Christian faith exists in spite of the magnificent contributions of the Christian faith to the progress of humanity and civilization for almost 2,000 years. It is not my intention in this letter to expose the conspirators who are dedicating themselves to the destruction of the Christian faith, nor to the nature and extent of the conspiracy itself. That exposure would fill many volumes. The history of the world for the past several centuries and current events at home and abroad confirm the existence of such a conspiracy. The worldwide network of diabolical conspirators implement this plot against the Christian faith while Christians appear to be sound asleep. The Christian clergy appear to be more ignorant or more indifferent about this conspiracy than other Christians. They seem to bury their heads in the sands of ignorance or indifference like the legendary ostrich. This ignorance or indifference on the part of the Christian clergy has dealt a blow to the Christian faith already from which it may never completely recover, if at all. It seems so sad. Christians deserve to be blessed in this crisis with a spiritual Paul Revere to ride across the nation warning Christians that their enemies are moving in on them fast. My dear Dr. Goldstein, will you volunteer to be that Paul Revere? Of equal importance to pinpointing the enemies who are making war upon the Christian faith from the outside is the necessity to discover the forces at work inside the Christian faith, which make it so vulnerable to its enemies on the outside. Applying yourself to this specific phase of the problem can prove of tremendous value in rendering ineffective the forces responsible for this dangerous state of affairs. The souls of millions of Christians who are totally unknown to you are quite uneasy about the status of the Christian faith today. The minds of countless thousands among the Christian clergy are troubled by the mysterious pressure from above, which prevents them from exercising their sound judgment in this situation. If the forces being manipulated against the Christian faith from the inside can be stopped, then the Christian faith will be able to stand upon its feet against its enemies as firmly as the Rock of Gibraltar. Unless this can be done soon, the Christian faith appears destined to crumble and to eventually collapse. An ounce of prevention is far preferable to a pound of cure, you can be sure, in this situation as in all others. With all the respect rightly due to the Christian clergy and in all humility, I have an unpleasant duty to perform. I wish to go on to record with you, excuse me. I wish to go on the record here with you that the Christian clergy are primarily, if not solely, responsible for the internal forces within the Christian faith, inimical to its best interest. This conclusion on my part indicates the sum total of all the facts in my book, which add up to just that. If you truly desire to be realistic and constructive, you must hoe the line and let the chips fall where they may. Hew to the line and let the chips fall where they may. That is the only strategy that can save the Christian faith from a fate it does not deserve. You cannot pussyfoot with the truth any longer, simply put, because you find now that the truth hurts someone you know or like. What? That didn't make any sense. You cannot pussyfoot with the truth any longer, simply because you find that now the truth hurts someone you may know or like. And that's true. And that's the point of this channel. I don't give a shit who it offends, who gets butthurt about it. But I have been taught a lot of things in my life, and I have realized that a lot of the things that I've taught are bullshit. That's the whole fucking damn point of this channel. Excuse my language. But that my whole point here is to expose this bullshit, right? Are you with me or are you with me? Anyways, okay. The dedicated enemies of the Christian faith have sufficiently convinced the world by this time of the savage methods they will adopt in their program to erase the Christian faith from the face of the earth. Earlier in this letter, I stated that in my humble opinion, the apathy of Christian clergy might be charged with sole responsibility for the increasing dilution of the devotion of countless Christians for the Christian faith. This is the natural consequence of the confusion created by the Christian clergy in the minds of Christians concerning certain fundamentals of the Christian faith. The guilt for this confusion rests exclusively upon Christian leadership, not upon Christians generally. Confusion creates doubt. Doubt creates loss of confidence. Loss of confidence creates loss of interest. As confusion grows, more and more confidence grows less and less and less. The result is complete loss of all interest. Can you hardly disagree with that, my dear Dr. Goldstein? Can you? The confusion in the minds of Christians concerning fundamentals of the Christian faith is unwarranted and unjustified. It need not exist. It would not exist if the Christian clergy did not aid and abet the deceptions responsible for it. The Christian clergy may be shocked to learn that they have been aiding and abetting the dedicated enemies of the Christian faith. Many of the Christian clergy are actually their allies but may not know it. This phase of the current worldwide campaign of spiritual sabotage is the most negative factor in the defense of the Christian faith. Countless Christians standing on the sidelines in this struggle see their Christian faith withering on the vine and about ripe enough to drop into the lap of its dedicated enemies. They can do nothing about it. Their cup is made more bitter for them as they observe this unwarranted and unjustified ignorance and indifference on the part of the Christian clergy. This apathetic attitude by the Christian clergy offers no opposition to the aggressors against the Christian faith. Retreat can only bring defeat. To obviate surrender to their dedicated enemies, the Christian clergy must about face immediately if they expect to become the victors in the invisible and intangible ideological war now being so subversively waged against the Christian faith under their very noses. When will they wake up? Well, part of that is because I think a lot of these churches have totally been infiltrated by Freemasons. I mean, like, duh. And you can't serve two masters. So we know right there that that is how the subversion happened. Looking back on it, I mean, this guy probably couldn't figure it out at the time, but now we know that most pastors out here are Freemasons or they're just sold out to some rabbi over there in Tel Aviv. All right. If I were asked to recite in this letter the many manners in which the Christian clergy are confusing the Christian concept of the fundamentals of the Christian faith, it will require volumes rather than pages to tell the whole story. Space alone compels me here to confine myself to the irreducible minimum. I will limit myself here to the most important reasons for this confusion. Brevity will of necessity limit the references cited to support the matters presented in this letter. I will do my best under the circumstances to establish the authenticity of the incontestable historic facts I call to your attention here. In my opinion, the most important reason is directly related to your present activities. Your responsibility for this confusion is not lessened by your good intentions. As you have said so many times, hell is paved with good intentions. The confusion your articles create is multiplied 1,000-fold by the wide publicity given to them as a result of the very high regard in which you personally are held by editors and readers across the nation, Christian and non-Christian alike. Your articles are continually reprinted and quoted from coast to coast. The utterance by the Christian clergy which confuses Christians the most is constantly repeated utterance that Jesus was a Jew. That also appears to be your favorite theme. That misrepresentation and distortion of an incontestable historical fact is uttered by Christian clergy upon the slightest pretext. They utter it constantly, also without provocation. They appear to be trigger happy to utter it. They never miss an opportunity to do so. Informed, intelligent Christians cannot reconcile this truly unwarranted misrepresentation and distortion of an incontestable historic fact by the Christian clergy with information known by them by now to the contrary, which comes to them from sources believed by them to be equally reliable. Holy shit, you guys. Like, I literally just was looking into like Marcion Christianity, and they don't believe that Jesus, I don't think they believe that Jesus was a Jew. And then I just watched Myth Vision, okay, this other guy who was a Christian who left Christianity, who basically used a lot of the Hebraic writings to debunk the lineage or whatever, that Jesus was fulfilling some messianic prophecy. Like, holy shit. Okay, I'm going to stop yapping. This poses a serious problem today for the Christian clergy. They can extricate themselves from their present predicament now only by resorting to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. That is the only formula by which the Christian clergy can recapture the lost confidence of Christians. As effective spiritual leaders, they cannot function without this lost confidence. They should make that their first order of business. My dear Dr. Goldstein, you are a theologian of high rank and a historian of note. Of necessity, you also should agree with other outstanding authorities on the subject of whether Jesus was a Jew. These leading authorities agree today that there is no foundation in fact for the implications, inferences, and the innuendos resulting from the incorrect belief that Jesus was a Jew. Incontestable historical facts and an abundance of other proofs established beyond the possibility of any doubt the incredibility of the assertion so often heard today that Jesus was a Jew. Without any fear of contradiction based upon fact, the most competent and best qualified authorities all agree today that Jesus Christ was not a so-called self-styled Jew. They now confirm that during his lifetime, Jesus was known as a Judean by his contemporaries and not as a Jew, and that Jesus referred to himself as a Judean and not as a Jew. During his lifetime here on earth, Jesus was referred to by contemporary historians as a Judean and not as a Jew. Contemporary theologians of Jesus, whose competence to pass upon this subject cannot be challenged by anyone today, also referred to Jesus during his lifetime here on earth as a Judean and not as a Jew. Okay, now I see what the distinction is, because the lie has been kind of almost made complete, and that most of the freaking church in America believes that the socio-political, geological, whatever geopolitical entity that is known as Israel is the same people from the Bible. Most of us know now that that's total BS, but maybe back in the day, maybe they didn't do, I guess it's because they didn't do a good job making that distinction. So here we are in hindsight learning of this. This book is, or letter is great. And this is also fair freaking use, okay? Inscribed upon the cross when Jesus was crucified were the Latin words, Jesus Nazarenus Rex Eudorium, or Eudiorum. Sorry, weird word. Eudiorum. Pontius Pilate was the author of that infamous inscription. Latin was Pontius Pilate's mother tongue. No one will question the fact that Pontius Pilate was well able to accurately express his own ideas in his own mother tongue. The authorities competent to pass upon the correct translation into English of the Latin Jesus Nazarenus Rex Eodeorum agree that it is Jesus the Nazarene, ruler of the Judeans. There is no disagreement upon that by them. So see, and this is where a lot of the deception has come to. These freaking Jews have made up their Hebrew language where they're distorting all kinds of shit, all right? During his lifetime here on earth, Jesus was not regarded by Pontius Pilate nor by the Judeans among whom he dwelt as King of the Jews. By the inscription on the cross upon which Jesus was crucified has been incorrectly translated into English language only since the 18th century. Pontius Pilate was ironic and sarcastic when he ordered inscribed upon the cross the Latin words Jesus Nazarenus Rex Eodeorum. About to be crucified, with the approval of Pontius Pilate, Jesus was being mocked by Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate was well aware at that time that Jesus had been denounced, defied, and denied by the Judeans, who, alas, finally brought about his crucifixion as related by history. Except for his few followers at that time in Judea, all other Judeans abhorred Jesus and detested his teachings and the things for which he stood. That deplorable fact cannot be erased from history by time. Pontius Pilate was himself the ruler of the Judeans at the time. He ordered inscribed upon the cross the Latin words Jesus Nazarenus Rex Eodeorum. In English, Jesus the Nazarene, ruler of the Judeans. But Pontius Pilate never referred to himself as ruler of the Judeans. The ironic and sarcastic reference of Pontius Pilate to Jesus as ruler of the Judeans can hardly be accepted as recognition by Pontius Pilate of Jesus as ruler of the Judeans. That is inconceivable by any interpretation. At the time of the crucifixion of Jesus, Pontius Pilate was the administrator in Judea for the Roman Empire. At the time in history, the area of Roman Empire included a part of the Middle East. As far as he was considered officially or personally, the inhabitants of Judea were Judeans to Pontius Pilate and not so-called quote-unquote Jews, as they have been styled since the 18th century. In the time of Pontius Pilate in history, there was no religious, racial, or national group in Judea known as Jews, nor had there been any group so identified anywhere else in the world prior to that time. Pontius Pilate expressed little interest as the administrator of the Roman Empire, officially or personally, in the wide variety of forms of religious worship then practiced in Judea. These forms of religious worship extended from phallic worship and other forms of idolatry to the emerging spiritual philosophy of an eternal, omnipotent, and indivisible divine deity, the emerging Yahweh, Jehovah concept that predated the Abraham of the Bible fame by approximately 2,000 years, or did it? As the administrator for the Roman Empire in Judea, it was the official policy of Pontius Pilate never to interfere in the spiritual affairs of the local population. Smart freaking guy. Pontius Pilate's primary responsibility was the collection of taxes to be forwarded to Rome, not the forms of religious worship practiced by the Judeans from whom those taxes were collected. As you well know, my dear Dr. Goldstein, the Latin word rex means ruler or leader in English. During the lifetime of Jesus in Judea, the Latin word rex meant only that to Judeans familiar with the Latin language, the Latin word rex is the Latin verb rego, regere, rexi, rectus. In English means, as you also well know, to rule or to lead. Latin was, of course, the official language in all the provinces administered by local administrator of the Roman Empire. This fact accounts for the inscription on the cross in Latin. With the invasion of the British Isles by the Anglo-Saxons, my peeps, the English language substituted the Anglo-Saxon king for the Latin equivalent rex, used before the Anglo-Saxon invasion. The adoption of a king for rex at this late date in British history did not retroactively alter the meaning of the Latin rex to the Judeans in the time of Jesus. The Latin rex to them meant only ruler or leader, as it still means in Latin. Anglo-Saxon king was spelled differently when first used, but at all times meant the same as rex in Latin, leader of a tribe. During the lifetime of Jesus, it was very apparent to Pontius Pilate that Jesus was the very last person in Judea the Judeans would select as their quote-unquote ruler or their quote-unquote leader. In spite of this situation in Judea, Pontius Pilate did not hesitate to order the inscription of the cross Iesus Nazarenus Rex Eudeorum. By the wildest stretch of the imagination, it is not conceivable that this sarcasm and irony by Pontius Pilate at the time of the crucifixion was not solely mockery of Jesus by Pontius Pilate and only mockery. After the reference to Jesus the Nazarene, ruler of the Judeans forthwith proceeded to crucify Jesus upon that very cross. In Latin, in the lifetime of Jesus, the name of the political subdivision in the Middle East known in modern history as Palestine was Iudea. It was then administered by Pontius Pilate as administrator for the Roman Empire, of which it was then a part. The English for the Latin Iudea was Judea. English Judean as the adjective for the noun Judea. The ancient native population of the subdivision in the Middle East, known in modern history as Palestine, was then called Iudaeus in Latin and Judean in English. Those words identified the indigenous population of Judea in the lifetime of Jesus. Who can deny that Jesus was a member of the indigenous population of Judea in his lifetime? And of course, you know, my dear Dr. Goldstein, in Latin, the genitive plural of Iudaeus is Iudeorum. The English translation of the genitive plural of Iudeorum is of the Judeans. It is utterly impossible to give any other English translation to Iudeorum than of the Judeans. Qualified and competent theologians and historians regard as incredible any other translation into English of the Iesus Nazarenus Rex Iudeorum than Jesus the Nazarene, ruler of the Judeans. You must agree that this is literally correct. At the time, Pontius Pilate was ordering Eius's Nazarenus Rex Eudaeum inscribed upon the cross. The spiritual leaders of Judea were protesting to Pontius Pilate to not write that Jesus was the ruler of the Judeans, but to inscribe instead that Jesus had said he was the ruler of the Judeans. The spiritual leaders of Judea made very strong protest to Pontius Pilate against his reference to Jesus as Rex Eudaeum, insisting that Pontius Pilate was not familiar with or misunderstood the status of Jesus in Judea. These protests are a matter of historical record, as you know. The spiritual leaders in Judea protested in vain with Pontius Pilate. They insisted that Jesus had said he was the ruler of the Judeans, but that Pontius Pilate was not to write that Jesus was the ruler of the Judeans. This is hilarious, dude. For after all, Pontius Pilate was a foreigner in Judea who could not understand the local situations as well as the spiritual leaders. The intricate pattern of the domestic, political, social, and economic cross currents in Judea interested Pontius Pilate very little as Rome's administrator. The Gospel by John was written originally in the Greek language according to the best authorities. In the Greek original, there is no equivalent for the English that Jesus had said he was the ruler of the Judeans. The English translation of the Greek original of the Gospel of John, XIX 19, reads, "Do not inscribe the monarch Basileus of the Judeans, Eudeos, but that he himself said, I am monarch Basileus of the Judeans, Eudeos." Eudea is the Greek word for the Latin Eudeus, and the English Judea. Basileus is the Greek monarch in English. Rex is the nearest word in Latin for Basileus in Greek. The English ruler or its alternative leader define the sense of Latin rex and the Greek Basileus as they were used in the Greek and Latin Gospel by John. Pontius Pilate washed his hands of the protest by the spiritual leaders in Judea who demanded of him that the inscription on the cross authored by Pontius Pilate be corrected in the manner they insisted upon. Pontius Pilate very impatiently replied to their demands, "What I have written, I have written." The inscription on the cross remained what it had been, Jesus Nazarenus Rex Eudaeum, or Jesus the Nazarene, ruler of the Judeans in English. The Latin quotations and words mentioned in this letter are verbatim quotations and the exact words which appear in the 4th century translation of the New Testament into Latin by St. Jerome. This translation is referred to as the Vulgate edition of the New Testament. It was the very first official translation of the New Testament into Latin made by the Christian Church. Since that time, it has remained the official New Testament version used by the Catholic Church. The translation of the Gospel into John into Latin by St. Jerome was made from the Greek language in which the Gospel of John was originally written according to the best authorities on this subject. The English translation of the Gospel by John, XIX 19, from the original Greek, or text, in the Greek language reads as follows. Pilate wrote a sign and fastened it to the cross, and the writing was Jesus the Nazarene, the monarch of the Judeans. In the original Greek manuscript, there is mention also made of the demands upon Pontius Pilate by the spiritual leaders in Judea that Pontius Pilate, after reference on the cross to Jesus as ruler of the Judeans. The Greek text of the original manuscript of the Gospel by John establishes beyond any question or doubt that the spiritual leaders in Judea at that time had protested to Pontius Pilate that Jesus was not the ruler of the Judeans, but only had said he was the ruler of the Judeans. There is no factual foundation in history or theology today for the implications, inferences, and innuendos that the Greek Eudeos, the Latin Eudeus, or the English Judean ever possessed a valid religious connotation. In their 3 respective languages, these 3 words only have indicated a strictly topographical or geographic connotation. In their correct sense, these 3 words in their respective languages were used to identify the members of the indigenous native population of the geographic area known as Judea in the lifetime of Jesus. During the lifetime of Jesus, there was not a form of religious worship practiced in Judea or elsewhere in the known world which bore a name even remotely resembling the name of a political subdivision of the Roman Empire, i.e., Judaism from Judea. No cult or sect existed by such a name. It is an incontestable fact that the word Jew did not come into existence until the year 1775. Prior to 1775, the word Jew did not exist in any language. That is fucking interesting as fuck. The word Jew was introduced in the English for the very first time in the 18th century when the Sheridan used it in his play The Rivals. 2. She shall have skin like a mummy and the beard of a Jew. Prior to the use of this word, Jew, in the English language by Sheridan in 1775, the word Jew had become a word in the English language. Shakespeare never saw the word Jew, as you will see. Shakespeare never used the word Jew in any of his works, the common general belief to the contrary notwithstanding. In his Merchant of Venice, 61, Shakespeare wrote as follows: What is the reason? Am I a you, I-E-W-E, hath not a you eyes, I-E-W-E? In Latin, St. Jerome, 4th century Vulgate edition of the New Testament, Jesus is referred to by the genitive plural of Iudaeus. In the Gospel by John, reference to the inscription on the cross, Iudaeorum. It was in the 4th century that St. Jerome translated into Latin the manuscripts of the New Testament from the original languages in which they were written. This translation by St. Jerome is referred to still today as the Vulgate edition by the Roman Catholic Church authorities who use it today. Jesus is referred to as a so-called Jew for the first time in the New Testament in the 18th century. When I think that was about, I'm not gonna say what I don't know, something. Look into the Masoretes and when they popped up and when they started writing stuff. Okay. Jesus is referred to as a so-called Jew for the first time in the New Testament in the 18th century. Early editions in the English language of the 14th century, first translations of the New Testament into English. Revised 18th century editions in the English language of the 14th century, first translations. See, they keep translating and translating crap over and over, and this is how they confuse the fuck out of you. The history of the origin of the word Jew in the English language leaves no doubt that the 18th century Jew is the 18th century contracted and corrupted English word for the 4th century Latin Iudaeus, found in St. Jerome's Vulgate edition. Of that there is no longer doubt. The available original manuscripts from the 4th century to the 18th century accurately trace the origin and give the complete history of the word Jew in the English language. In these manuscripts are to be found all the many earlier English equivalents extending through the 14th centuries from the 4th to the 18th century. From the Latin Iudaeus to the English Jew, these English forms included excessively GYU, GIU, IU, IUU, IUU, IUW, IEWW, or I'm sorry, IEUU, IEUY, IWE, IOW, IEWE, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to spell all these because who the fuck cares? And then finally, in the 18th century, the word Jew. The many earlier English equivalents for Jews through the 14th centuries are Giwis, Jews, Gaius, 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 and these are all spelled with a G. Juice, Eos, Eos, Ius, Use, and then also finally in the 18th century, Jews. With the rapidly expanding use in England in the 18th century for the first time in history of the greatly improved printing presses, unlimited quantities of a New Testament were printed. These revised 18th century editions of the earlier 14th century first translations into the English language were then widely distributed throughout England and the English-speaking world among families who had never possessed a copy of the New Testament in any language. Wow. In these 18th century editions with revisions, the word Jew appeared for the first time in any English translations. The word Jew as it was used in the 18th century editions has since continued in use in all the editions of the New Testament in the English language, which is totes effed. The use of the word Jew thus was stabilized. Okay, that's when we started using it, was like in the 1700s, friends. Okay, as you know, my dear Dr. Goldstein, the best known 18th century editions of the New Testament in English are the Rhymes Douai edition and the King James Authorized edition. The Rhymes translation of the New Testament into English was first printed in 1582, but the word Jew did not appear in it. The King James Authorized translation of the New Testament into English was begun in 1604 and first published in 1611. I have that one. The word Jew did not appear in it either. The word Jew appeared in both these well-known editions and their 18th century revised versions for the first times. Countless copies of the revised 18th century editions of the Rhymes and the King James translations of the New Testament into English were distributed to the clergy and the laity throughout the English-speaking world. Okay, I just want to make sure the mic is still going. They did not know the history of the origin of the English word Jew, nor did they care. They accepted the English word Jew as the only and as the accepted form of the Latin Iudaeus and the Greek Iudaeos. How could they be expected to have known otherwise? The answer is they could not, and they did not. It was a new English word to them. When you studied Latin in your school days, you were taught that the letter I in Latin, when used as the first letter in a word, is pronounced like the letter Y in English. And when it is the first letter in words like yes, youth, and yacht, the I in Iudaeus is pronounced like the Y in yes, youth, and yacht in English. In all the 4th century to 18th century forms of the 18th century Jew, the letter I was pronounced like the letter English Y in yes, young, and yacht. The same is true of the GI or the GY, where it was usually in place of the letter I. I didn't know that. The present pronunciation of the word Jew in modern English is a development of recent times. In the English language today, the J in Jew is pronounced like the J in the English, justice, jolly, and jump. This is the case only since the 18th century. Prior to the 18th century, the letter J in Jew was pronounced exactly like the Y in the English, yes, youth, and yacht. Until the 18th century, and perhaps even later than the 18th century, the word Jew in English was pronounced like the English you or hue, and the word Jews like use or hues. The present pronunciation of Jew in English is the new pronunciation acquired after the 18th century. The German language still retains the Latin original pronunciation. The German Jude is the German equivalent of the English Jew. The J in the German Jude is pronounced exactly like the English Y and yes, youth, yacht. The German J is the equivalent of the Latin I, and both are pronounced exactly like the Y in English, yes, youth, and yacht. The German Jude is virtually the first syllable of the Latin Eudaeus and is pronounced exactly like it. The German Jude is the German contraction and corruption of the Latin Eudaeus, as the English Jew is the contraction and corruption of the Latin Eudaeus. The German J always pronounced like the English Y in yes, youth, and yacht. When it is the first letter of a word, the pronunciation of J in German Jude is not an exception to the pronunciation in J in German. The English language, as you already know, my dear Dr. Goldstein, is largely made up of words adopted from foreign languages, much like modern Hebrew. After their adoption by the English language, foreign words were then adapted by contracting their spelling and corrupting their foreign pronunciation to make them more easily pronounced in English from their English spellings. This process of first adopting foreign words and then adapting them by contracting their spelling and corrupting their pronunciation resulted in such new words in the English language as cab from the French cabriolet and many thousands of other words similarly from their original foreign spelling. Hundreds of others must come to your mind. By this adopting and adapting process, the Latin Eudaeus and the Greek Eudaeos finally emerged in the 18th century as Jew in the English language. The English-speaking people struggled through 14 centuries seeking to create for the English language an English equivalent for the Latin Judaeus and the Greek Judaios, which could easily be pronounced in English from its English spelling. The English Jew was the resulting 18th century contracted and corrupted form of the Latin Judaeus and Greek Judaios. The English Jew is easily pronounced in English from its English spelling. The Latin Judaeus and the Greek Judaios cannot be as easily pronounced in English from the Latin and Greek spelling as they were forced to coin a word. The earliest version of the New Testament in English from the Latin Vulgate edition is the Wycliffe or Wycliffe edition, published in 1380. In the Wycliffe edition, Jesus is there mentioned as one of the Iuis. That was the 14th century version of the Latin Iudaeus and was pronounced Huies in the plural and Hugh in or Huey in the singular. In the 1380 Wycliffe edition in English, the Gospel by John 19 or XIX, because this is all Latin, Greco-Latin, reads, Jesus of Nazareth, king of the Hueys. Prior to the 14th century, the English language adopted the Anglo-Saxon king, K-Y-N-G, together with many other Anglo-Saxon words in place of the Latin rex and the Greek basileus. The Anglo-Saxon also meant tribal leader. In the Tyndale edition of the New Testament in English, published in 1525, Jesus was likewise described as one of the Iewes, Iewes. In the Coverdale edition, published in 1535, Jesus was also described as one of the Iewes. In the Coverdale edition of the Gospel by John, XIX 19 reads, Jesus of Nazareth, king of the Iewes. In the Cranmer edition, published in 1539, Jesus was again described as one of the Iewes. In the Geneva edition, published in 1540 to 1557, Jesus was also described as one of the Iewes. In the Rhymes edition, published in 1582, Jesus was described as one of the Iewes. In the King James edition, published in 1604 to 1611, also known as the Authorized Version of Jesus, was described again as one of the Iewes. The forms of the Latin Iudaeus were used, which were current at the same time of these translations were made. Honestly, I find Iudaeus far easier to pronounce than Iewes. 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 Like, I think I can say Iudaeus a lot easier. But I digress. Anyways, okay, the translation into the English of the Gospel by John XIX 19 from the Greek in which it was originally written reads, "Do not inscribe the monarch of the Judeans, but that he himself said, I am monarch." In the original Greek manuscript, the Greek basileus appears to be monarch. In the English and the Greek, Iudaeos appears for the Judeans. In the English, Iudea. In Greek is Judea. In English, Iudaeos. In Greek as Judeans in English. There is no reason for any confusion. My dear Dr. Goldstein, if the generally accepted understanding today of the English Jew and Judean conveyed the identical implications, influences, and innuendos, as both rightly should, it would make no difference which of these two words was used when referring to Jesus in the New Testament or elsewhere. But the implications, inferences, and innuendos today conveyed by these two words are as different as black is from white. The word Jew today is never regarded as a synonym for Judean, nor is Judean regarded as a synonym for Jew. As I have explained, when the word Jew was first introduced into English language in the 18th century, its one and only implication, inference, and innuendo was Judean. However, during the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, a well-organized and well-financed international pressure group created a so-called secondary meaning for the word Jew among the English-speaking peoples of the world. This so-called secondary meaning for the word Jew bears no relation whatsoever to the 18th century original connotation of the word Jew. It is a misrepresentation. The secondary meaning of the word Jew today bears as little relation to its original and correct meaning as the secondary meaning of today for the word camel bears to the original and correct meaning of the word camel, or the secondary meaning today for the word ivory bears to the original and correct meaning of the word ivory. The secondary meaning today for the word camel is a cigarette by that same name, but its original and correct meaning is a desert animal by that ancient name. The secondary meaning of the word ivory today is a piece of soap, but its original and correct meaning is the tusk of a male elephant. And I think I'm going to stop right there because I don't want these to go too long. But like that was a good place to also stop on because what a great analogy he made there. Um, you know, like words mean things, and we have to like not forget. We have to not forget that words mean things, and we cannot let people change the names of them. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop here because I can hear the toddler. He's up from his nap and he's playing now and he's jumping around up there and screaming and stuff. And I don't want this to really like interfere with that. But I'm going to go ahead and post this reading, and I'm going to try to do these readings now with a little less interruption and a little less commentary, and try to just get through this so that we can start on the second book that I have, which is called Zionism. All right. Mwah. I'll see you in the next one.